Hey everybody, welcome back to PC Gamer Show. My name is James Davenport. We've got a special segment about a big surprise that happened in the gaming industry this week. The capitalist gristmill turns ever more, pulverizing innumerable corporate grains into a fine homogeneous substance used to bake the big bread we call Microsoft. And this morning, September 21st, we found out that Microsoft acquired ZeniMax Media, all around 2,300 employees, the parent company of Bethesda Softworks, for $7.5 billion. And that's the second most expensive video game company acquisition in history. And this puts some of PC gaming's biggest series in the hands of Microsoft, including Doom, The Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and some of the most beloved studios, such as Machine Games, the folks behind the recent Wolfenstein games, and Arcane Studios, creators of Dishonored and Prey. And joining me to talk about it are Evan Lottie and Tim Clark. Hopefully we can all collectively work through our emotions and reorient ourselves to what this means for the future of Microsoft, its big growing collection of studios, and the future of PC gaming as a whole. So what a thing to wake up to on a Monday morning. Did any of you see this coming?
No, I think I'd be lying if I said I did. It'd be fun to kind of claim that I did, but I woke up this morning just to my girlfriend, who also covers games for a living, shouting "fuck" from the living room. And I was like, has something happened to the dog? But no, she immediately told me what had gone on. And it's one of those ones where when you kind of look back, I guess you could say it makes sense, because there's been rumors for a while about Microsoft kind of sniffing around various big kind of acquisitions that would inject a bunch of like content making stuff into the organization. There was talk when we were writing about the story this morning, I was kind of looking back at previous kind of coverage, and there was talk of them buying EA back in 2018, which seemed kind of fanciful. And then just a couple of weeks ago, there was talk that perhaps they would kind of buy Bungie and reintegrate the folks responsible for making Halo, although most of them aren't there anymore, which was kind of poo-pooed at the time. But I think like an acquisition of this size to have stayed this quiet is a hell of a thing, really, when you think that, you know, the Xbox specs leaked and forced them into having to announce those early, but they managed to keep something as big as this completely under wraps. It wasn't being kind of rumored or whispered about. And I think we'll come to this, but the weird thing is, I wonder how much effect it will have on us in PC gaming, and I suspect it may not be that much. In the wider context of the kind of the games industry as a whole and the coming console war, which we see hoving into view pretty fast now, I think it probably is going to have a big impact.
Absolutely. It is the biggest games industry news of the year. I mean, maybe not in terms of, it's not maybe the most exciting game announcement or trailer. Obviously, it's businesses doing what they do. But in terms of the long-term implications, you only have to look as far as someone like Bioware, which is a comparatively much smaller organization. Meanwhile, this acquisition has doubled the number of studios that Microsoft owns compared to what it did yesterday. It's massive. And, I was trying to reflect on the acquisitions Microsoft has made in the past, and certainly Rare is a notable one. Mid-90s, Nintendo 64 games, I guess, is kind of the era that they're known for, unless you play Battletoads or something. And you think about what they've done kind of under Microsoft's control, and well, you kind of look at that legacy, and immediately Microsoft sort of turned them at Kinect. They turned them at their biggest initiative. Then they made CFDs, which I think is sort of Rare's biggest achievement creatively under Microsoft. So eventually they kind of produced something that I think is like absolutely true to the spirit of their studio and kind of stands alone by itself. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what are Microsoft's initiatives right now? What is sort of their strategic goal and focus? In terms of PC gamers, I think right now it continues to be to win over PC gamers. We saw that with Master Chief Collection coming to Steam and other Xbox games coming to Steam, Games Pass available on PC and whatnot. So I think as long as that remains the case, like you said, Tim, like we won't notice much change, and I think we only stand to benefit in terms of just the actual game experiences. But from a more corporate experience, maybe we can talk about like, yes, monopolies are bad, and competition's good.
The weird thing with the Rare example you give, Evan, is because I felt that when they did point them at Kinect, as you said, it was almost because they didn't know what to do with Rare at that point. I think they wanted a prestige studio at that time. It was a company that had made GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, and everyone kind of wanted, was already kind of in the market for wanting prestige shooters back then as well. And it just never kind of panned out. And like you say, it took them really until Sea of Thieves, which was, again, not an instant hit either, for them to kind of feel like they really made sense as part of Microsoft's portfolio. Now, I expect Bethesda to be quite different insofar as Bethesda is one of the biggest publishers already. They have a slate of games that are household names to gamers, Doom, Wolfenstein, etc. So you would expect like roughly business as usual. I think as for why they're doing it now, pre-orders for the new Xbox go live tomorrow at time of recording, so it's not a coincidence they're making this announcement today.
I mean, that's quite an aggressive and brash move. Like personally, if I look back over the past couple of years, not to get into like console war rhetoric, but like you think about what was it at the Game Awards last year, Jeff Keighley's show, they had like the big three all come out on stage with like this nice but like very milquetoast message about like games inspiring us all and blah blah blah. Like
the power of games.
Yeah, but I would not say that these companies are like at each other's throats. So there's none of that. They're very friendly with each other publicly, but now we have this like a really extraordinary. I mean, this is like the most aggressive move that I've seen in the last few years between Microsoft and Sony to sort of dictate this corporate battle between whose box under the TV is going to sell more.
But to me, they had to do something, right? One of the conversations I wrote about this morning in our reaction piece, I was talking to a friend just a day or so ago, and we were talking about whether they would buy a console or not. And they were like, well, why would I? There's not a single game on Xbox that isn't on either PC or PlayStation. Right? We were laughing about it. We kind of said, well, look, there's Halo, but Halo's been bumped back to next year and no longer feels like Microsoft's kind of like special unicorn game either. People were openly laughing at the screenshots of it, unfortunately. And though I don't think that's why you go out and spend $7.5 billion, I think they would have realized quite quickly, like, we can't bet the farm on Master Chief anymore. So what do you do, right? Well, we've got pots of cash. The one thing we can do is leverage that to bring in a bunch of, highly desirable game series and talented creators, like effectively overnight. And this is where it gets weird to me, is I think, like you say, Evan, there's been this sense of kind of entente cordiale between the console manufacturers where everyone's kind of reasonably friendly, and Microsoft's really talked the talk for a few years now of kind of believing in open platforms and wanting their experiences to be
crossplay.
Yeah, crossplay especially. And we've, like you said, we've reaped the benefits of that on PC. If you think that suddenly means they're a charity and they're going to put Elder Scrolls on both machines on day one, and by machines I mean the two consoles, I don't believe that. I don't believe you spend that sort of money without wanting to leverage it as a competitive advantage. And whilst I get that Game Pass is their competitive advantage, I think they're making this move because you can't just rely on Games Pass, right? If they thought just having the best subscription service, which I think we would all agree they already have, was enough for them to, in inverted commas, win this next console generation, then that's what they would do. But I think they know they need their own equivalents of The Last of Us and Uncharted and stuff that Sony's always been strong on in terms of having its own IP. Now, that's not to say I think that this necessarily means we're going to enter a new era where all Bethesda stuff suddenly becomes completely beholden to Microsoft and it never appears on other platforms at all. I think we probably are back in a world of timed exclusives and stuff. But the thing that really I would remind people is that the reason I think Microsoft seemed so cuddly for such a long time is because they were losing, right? They were behind. They were fighting catch up against Sony in a way that they weren't in the previous generation. Microsoft is still a voracious money-making machine, and they're not here just for the betterment of games. I'm sure they believe in that themselves as well. I'm sure people at all the companies do. My expectation is, I think PC will be largely unaffected because I think they are spiritually committed to that kind of day and date stuff now, and supporting features across both and crossplay, etc. But I think there's now much more of a decision around if you're buying a second gaming machine, you're potentially buying into one of two ecosystems that could have quite different games on it.
Yeah, and I think if anything, the benefit that comes to PC gamers in a roundabout way, since Microsoft is now positioning themselves to react to whatever the future of gaming is with these prestige studios and prestige IP to sort of leverage selling the box and Game Pass, which is like this flexible, that is maybe more reflective of the Netflix model, the all content at all times future that it appears we're moving towards. If anything, this pressures Sony maybe to reappend those also available on PC in small font to those trailers that released last week. This feels like, if anything, what will stop mattering for Sony will be, and again, console war, we don't want to get too deep into this, but will be that prestige stuff, and just will be having an audience at all, and maybe reacting to what Game Pass is and the flexibility of Microsoft going forward. But I don't know. Beyond that, I think you're right. I think PC, we just benefit. It's a beautiful, beautiful future in a way. I do kind of wonder though, how do you think this bodes for the future of this studios? This is, I mean, we mentioned, I think ZeniMax is big enough to maybe operate on its own for a long time. Rare has come around the bend. Do we see this affecting series we already know? Do we see some wacky crossover? Do we see new incentives?
I'm not sure how much we'll see of it ourselves, but I think in terms of the culture within the company, it inevitably will lead to change. Like we know people at Mojang who sort of said after the Microsoft acquisition there, things changed in the way that they had to get approvals and stuff. And I'm sure there'll be good things and bad things about it for the folk who work there, such as the way of things whenever there's this kind of takeover. I mean, on the kind of the more creative side, I would say largely, I think Microsoft has been a relatively good custodian of these studios. I'm sure some people will scream at me for saying that, and they've definitely made mistakes as well. But I feel like see them trying to rectify those with how they're kind of treating games or series like Age of Empires and stuff now, and being kind of respectful of the stuff they own. So I think it's a pretty good fit actually. I think that's one thing that's kind of exciting about it is Microsoft as a kind of collective of studios makes a lot more sense now with this stuff on board.
Yeah, and the studios, I mean, many of them are tied to specific franchises so closely. I mean, Microsoft is buying those franchises. That's not as if like they're going to take something like Doom and say, well, great job, guys, I'm going to give this to another studio, I mean, it is going to continue to produce Doom games for Microsoft for sure, and DLC and, for the near future. Now, someone like ZeniMax Online Studios, the creators of Fallout 76 and Elder Scrolls Online, would they potentially end up working on a massively multiplayer franchise, something else that Microsoft owns? I don't think of another Microsoft brand. I don't know.
Halo, Gears of War, MMO. Yeah, no.
Great.
All sorts of stuff.
That's possible. I do think Arcane is potentially one that could be affected here. Again, you look at Rare, both of those studios are incredibly creative, and they're driven by their art direction and their ideas, their character design, their storytelling, right? More than their like technology, as some studios are. So it'll be interesting to see how they're used. And whether like we see something like Dishonored continue. And I think that'll be a strong indication of Bethesda's quote unquote independence as an entity within Microsoft. Likewise, whether QuakeCon, which is I think probably still the biggest LAN party in North America, we'd love to see that continue on. That's important and precious to PC gamers as kind of a tradition. Minecon has continued as an event, promotional event. I'm sure Microsoft loses money on it. So that gives me hope that QuakeCon will continue as well.
I'm excited to think about. I mean, the immediate thing that came up this morning was like, Obsidian, Fallout New Vegas 2. That's a possibility now. These properties, having the resources and in the way Ubisoft uses like dozens and dozens of studios across the U.S. or the world to sort of like prop up its bigger games. That's interesting to think about. I do worry, like you say, about something like Arcane becoming a specialist like scaffolding studio.
I was talking to someone in development at another publisher just over the weekend, and they were talking about how like every big game these days is the product pretty much of multiple studios and technology is really shared. And I think for the expanded group now, that will probably not immediately, but further down the line become a source of strength for them. That shared technology approach. Have you been excited about any potential crossovers that people have been talking about? Are you expecting to be able to kind of fly around the Forza track on a dragon from Skyrim shouting Fist Rodar?
Master Chief and Doom Guy can kiss and it can be canon now. Like, that's not fan art anymore, That's the
could be like a Jason versus Freddy, like 1v1 me bro type situation.
I don't know. I guarantee like the marketing will be too cute in some instances now that Microsoft has just like, all these mascots to play with. We can maybe expect like a Super Smash Brothers style, like Microsoft Studio sort of benevolence to emerge over time, but with all these different characters and such. But I don't know. I don't see, I think that's like long-term, long tail stuff or exploitative short-term, like marketing stuff.
But I think one of the things that we care most about, right, is sort of individual heritage and sort of personality of these studios. And, as much as they have already, Arcane and they've already been owned for several years now by a large media corporation called ZeniMax. But, Bioware, you guys brought up earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is such an important kind of a comparison to make here because, think about Bioware pre-EA and post-EA, and I don't know what your guys' opinion on how that studio has evolved. And, they continue to essentially make the franchises that they made beforehand. Undoubtedly, like, their identity has changed, their output, has changed a little bit.
I thought about Mass Effect Andromeda for a second, and then it just washed over me.
No.
And from a PC gamer's perspective, I would say that their games have become more multi-platform, which is not the worst thing in the world, but I would of course prefer every game to be PC-led and PC-focused.
I guess my hope would be the model, because I feel like BioWare does not feel like it's been like entirely positive as an experience for anyone. Respawn's experience at EA perhaps feels more
that's
kind of like a model you'd want to replicate. But even with Respawn, right, Titanfall 1 and 2, an interesting game followed by a much improved one with a campaign we're still talking about now, but not the commercial successes. And right then, like, the whispers were kind of, shit, what are EA going to do with Respawn? It doesn't seem to be working out. And then Apex happens, and
crank out a single player Star Wars game in there, please.
Yeah, I feel like that's the fate you don't want for the Bethesda stuff, and I don't really see that. I think that's why you're right to kind of point to Arcane, is it's more of a boutique studio, and that's why you kind of feel nervous about it, because it's not as good as Dishonored is. It's not kind of in that, like, well, they can just make Dishonored forever territory that you kind of feel like something like Doom is. They can probably just make, I think Doom will outlive me pretty comfortably.
I think that what we have to prepare ourselves for is I don't know how to characterize this, some kind of loss, because you don't like move house with so much shit so rapidly and like sort of lose stuff along the way. I feel like it's inevitable that
James speaking as a man who has just moved house there.
I've moved too many.
Sense the trauma.
It's just like break shit, But like, I just feel like, when absorbed into the greater, over time maybe, corporate structure and people can sort of define these studios up to an extent, but ultimately there's going to be a bottom line that keeps them functioning, targets to hit, yada yada, whatever, and they won't always make sense like as they are over the long term. I say this as a CEO clearly, but and I think we should prepare ourselves to see big arms or chunks of these studios or of ZeniMax to sort of like shutter or be absorbed into different or warped into different entities. It's gonna happen.
I don't know how analogous this is, right? But like if Netflix, Netflix buys up Warner Brothers and you're like, oh cool, like there's gonna be some Batman Netflix shows, that sounds good. And then they buy up like Paramount and Viacom and like a couple other TV networks and a startup. Oh wow, I guess like Netflix is the only game in town now, pretty much. And before you know it. And I think like one of the things I don't really fully grasp the economics of Game Pass from game developer perspective. This is something I think we should be looking into more closely, as clearly the service has grown from 10 to 15 million in the last 5 months. But I saw David Brevik on Twitter, one of the creators of Diablo, saying right now, and I'm sort of paraphrasing him, right now Game Pass is a great and fair deal for developers, but I worry a bit about how it may not be a great deal in the future. If game streaming becomes the best way to get your game in front of customers, and it is Game Pass or bust, that will be a lot of power they, meaning Microsoft, control. So again, right, if Netflix, if Game Pass is kind of the distribution mechanism to get audience, compared to something like Steam, if a greater share of the people playing games are doing so through this service, then gosh, fewer people are kind of buying certain types of games outright, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, I think, if that becomes true, he's right that Microsoft will be a very powerful entity in games, and will have a lot of responsibility to certainly to developers as well as us to manage that well and be fair in the deals that they create.
I think my counterpoint would be that we've kind of lived and played in for decades now, where you've had 3 or 4 really powerful players already. I mean, you have like on PC Steam, and now kind of the Array East Epic Game Store, and console, and you've had the kind of the big 3 of Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony, and they've all wielded tremendous tremendously big audiences, like literally in the tens of millions. My hope would be that gaming is kind of so vibrant and the technology moves so fast that it would be pretty hard for one company, however kind of deep pocketed it was and however kind of big its resources were, to really truly lock the others completely out. Much as though I think they probably would secretly quite like to do that. I think the question around like developers being recompensed correctly is always going to be a challenging one, but I think that's why you get stuff like the proposition Epic started to offer them becomes attractive, right? Because they are able to kind of push Steam harder than it was being pushed.
Yeah, I mean, Epic definitely stands out in that circumstance because they are like a rare late comer to the party, so to speak, in terms of the platform wars. I mean, other than them, what is the last digital distribution service that has come in and actually made a dent in the marketplace?
I mean, one of the interesting things on that line is, I can't remember where I was reading this, but someone else was making the point that, Google with Stadia has really struggled despite infinite money to make any dent on this sort of space. The barriers to entry are clearly big and getting bigger. So yeah, I can see why there would be concern. But then also, like, it's easier than ever to distribute independent games and stuff as well.
What sticks with me is like, it feels like, to me, a risky, bold move, because so much about the future of video games is uncertain. And with Game Pass, I think the game development will change, at least internally at Microsoft and their big umbrella of studios, like how we perceive the perceived value of games if this thing catches on. And Microsoft is definitely pinning, Game Pass being the next big thing because it's everywhere. It's on PC. It's attached to their new fancy box that is not terribly expensive, and there's going to be a huge install base there no matter what.
Here's a question for you two.
Yeah.
When do you think the purchase will really kind of make itself felt to players? And by that I mean, Spencer today has been saying that they'll talk about, they're going to honor the kind of the contracts that Bethesda ZeniMax already had in place for games like Deathloop and Tokyo Ghostwire. Is it Ghostwire Tokyo?
Yeah.
I said that the wrong way around. So those were set to debut on PS5 first. So I think that's still going to happen because there's signed documents to ensure that. But which are going to be the kind of first titles where it becomes a decision for Microsoft to say, like, all right, we're going to debut this Bethesda game on Game Pass and on Xbox and PC, but we're going to have to make a call as to whether we want it to appear on our rivals, right? Do we know what the first kind of...
It won't be until late 2021 at the earliest.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, we're not going to really... The teeth of it won't really be sunk in until... like late next year at the earliest.
No,
and again, to make the Bioware comparison, I don't know if we even felt that as gamers, so to speak, for years. For the culture to change, for the kind of aesthetics and marketing of a studio to change. The real DNA that kind of makes that studio what it is, where it came from, and its heritage. Bioware's heritage is like a D&D, Baldur's Gate kind of inspired studio. For founders to leave the company and stuff like that. Like. Those types of changes take a half a decade or more.
Yeah, oftentimes when you have these deals, like with you mentioning founders, key talent will be locked in on kind of earnouts where they have to stay X amount of time before they can kind of cash out whatever their stock options are and stuff. And you've seen that definitely at other studios where suddenly you get a kind of what looks like an exodus of talent happen at the same time, but it's because they fulfilled whatever obligations were in contracts.
It'll be something that we are vigilantly watching and paying attention to for sure over the next forever until games go away, I guess. But there's some things, like, for people whose this is news to, is that some things have come out. The Elder Scrolls Online will continue exactly as it was following the Microsoft purchase. Like you said, Tim, the Sony deals will be honored there. A good thing today, all future Bethesda games have been confirmed to be on Xbox Game Pass from day one. It's kind of fucking insane to think that Starfield,
the wording is kind of, Fraser pointed this out, the wording is kind of weird. They said like future games like Starfield will be on Game Pass day one, but they didn't necessarily say every single game, although that was the implication I read from it. It felt to me like they meant every game. Yeah,
they gotta commit to that. Anyway, so any closing thoughts? Or
My thought is just that this has been a hell of a year for news. Like, every week, I think we're kind of in the doldrums of the summer, or like, I guess now we're into autumn/fall. and you kind of think, well, it's going to be a bit quiet. There's not much going on, and then some incredible kind of news bomb drops from the sky. It's been obviously like a bad year in a lot of respects, but like the hits keep coming in terms of like big gaming news stories, and year ain't over yet. So let's see what else has got to come.
I guess my final thought is, consolidation tends to inspire further consolidation. Maybe not immediately, but you look at tech companies as maybe one example, and who's next? Bethesda had its own E3 conference. It kind of doesn't get bigger than that as far as studios are concerned. So you can kind of count on one hand the number of quote unquote large independent studios that remain, with Obsidian off the table. There's folks like Gearbox, I guess. So it'll be interesting to see how Ubisoft, EA, and certainly Sony respond in the coming year, and whether they're inspired to make moves of their own to consolidate things further.
Right on. Well, thanks for chatting with me, you two.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, it's always nice to talk with basically like the brains of the operation. An honor.
The old men, anyway.